Welcome to the COSIN podcast, bringing you timely insights and strategies to succeed in the ever-evolving world of school system technology. On each episode, you'll hear from certified education technology leaders, visionary district change makers, and instructional experts who will discuss the technology topics making a difference in schools today. And now, enjoy today's show. On today's episode, we're addressing one of the most timely, pressing issues that educators and edtech leaders of all roles are grappling with. How can we close the knowledge gaps created by the challenges of COVID-19? This is the first episode of a three-part mini-series presented by eGlass. According to a new report from McKinsey, students are testing about 10 points behind in math and 9 points behind in reading compared to previous years. Quote-unquote knowledge gaps for many students are averaging 4 to 6 months behind expected progress in a typical year. School leaders and especially classroom teachers have a clear understanding of the challenges students have faced, the goals that have been set for their learning, and the urgency of achieving a great start to the new academic year. You've surely heard the term learning loss more times than you can count. And another term gaining popularity for accurately describing the current situation is unfinished learning, which refers to planned learning over the past year, and in fact, each year before that, which students were unable to complete. The goal for schools now is to help students successfully catch up on that learning and begin making progress on new content as well. But how can teachers do this, and what technology can help? On the COSIN podcast, we like to put evidence into action, so I'm pleased to welcome a guest who will help us do just that. Marcia Kish, Chief Innovation Officer with DSD Professional Development, is here to take us through the issues and, more importantly, the solutions she sees. Thanks for joining me, Marcia.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited about being here today.
Excellent. This is a really important conversation, so I'm glad we're having it. And I want to start off right here, which is from your vantage point, what have been the biggest challenges you've seen teachers and students face with this past year?
Well, first and foremost, I want to start off by saying that all educators and all students and parents worked extremely hard over the last couple of years to keep the momentum of education going. So we understand that. But some challenges that are coming down the pipeline as we were getting back into school or as we were getting into that hybrid learning last year is just that knowledge gap. Because some kids were learning at home, some kids were learning on site, some kids were learning in a hybrid environment, there's these little holes and gaps along the way that might have been just created just due to the fact of lack of internet issues or, oh, wait, I missed that, or just teachers figuring out life in general and how to teach in this new way. So knowledge gaps are becoming more of a big issue of how to actually fill in some of the things that might have been missed over the last couple of years.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And thinking about, our listeners, most of whom are tech directors or other administrators in schools and districts in particular, like thinking about the role you've had in schools and the conversations you've been able to have with educators over this past year or two. Does anything come to mind that you may have been able to uncover in those conversations that some of these, tech leaders, especially CTOs, folks at district level, may not have had as many opportunities to hear directly that you can kind of convey?
Yeah, so a couple of things that were really our big forefront that I've been talking to admin about and tech directors and coaches is two big things. Number one is most schools went to one-to-one devices. So now we're trying to figure out how to use all this technology in the classroom in a meaningful, purposeful way. Thinking about it more as quality versus quantity of technology. That's our biggest thing that we're seeing. And the second thing is almost every admin that I have talked to is really focusing this year on differentiated instruction. How can we have a classroom of 24 kids and really target their individual needs? So with the mix of one-to-one devices and differentiated instruction, that has been our true focus and our journey for this coming year.
Yeah, absolutely. And along those lines as well, and really playing into success moving forward, I think we need to talk about engagement. And student engagement plays such an important role in learning, and in particular, after a year or two, when many students were remote, they were dealing with a variety of disruptions to their normal routine. It's a good time to take a fresh look at engagement, and I'm thinking in particular about factors that lead to disengagement, missing relationships, lack of personalized attention, students feeling like they aren't succeeding, which leads to decreased motivation. When you think about some of these things, what are your recommendations for increasing and maintaining engagement to support better learning as we head into this really important next year?
This is a fabulous question. And I'm always doing workshops on increasing student engagement during the pandemic and even for this upcoming year. A lot of people are reaching out to me like engagement, student ownership. What are we going to do? So, some of the key things that we do when we're working with teachers is we look at their environment, their lesson plans, and the deployment. So, what I mean by an environment is that when we go into a classroom, we need to make sure that we have things that are going to engage our students. So, one to one. If we have a one to one classroom, we don't want the kids on a computer screen all the time. So, one way that we're really talking about engagement is doing what we call the 55, 35, 10 guide. So, when you're planning your lesson, think about putting your lesson into chunks. I'm going to spend about 55% of my time without technology. I know it sounds crazy, but I really want the students talking, writing, collaborating, communicating. We want them listening. We want that classroom experience to be really full of just student driven outcomes. The 35% is technology. I have a master's in instructional technology. I love anything tech, but at the same time, I have to know that there's a balance. So when I'm planning lessons with teachers, what we do is we really think about that 35% where we are using quality technology programs that are going to enhance what the students are learning in the small group settings. So the technology, some of my favorite tech tools that are really engaging, that help promote that student engagement and ownership would include, let's say, Khan Academy. Love Khan Academy just due to the fact that the kids could be kind of learning and relearning the same topics from the teacher, but in their own way. Another one of my favorites is GimKit, GIMKIT. Students go crazy over this program due to the fact that they're answering questions and it's a fun game environment. Another one of my favorite tech programs would include Freckle. I really like freckle.com because it's a K-12, or let's I guess it's K-9 program that's adaptive. So the students are learning at their level. Remember I said one of those big conversations were about differentiated instruction? Well, Freckle will give you that specific data to let you know, the teacher, know exactly where those holes and gaps might be in their learning. And then we can start to target and pinpoint that. With this combination of some of these really good tech programs, we also want to include things that, like e-class, they're going to increase that engagement. So when the kids come to the teacher during a small group, we'll have that e-class right there, and the teacher can be writing and showcasing what they need to learn. But the best part about e-class is that the teacher never has to take their eyes off of the students, so they can watch to see those aha moments. So going back to that 55, no tech, talking, collaborating, to technology where we're using really good high quality tech programs and devices. And then that last 10% is what we call flex tech. Meaning, when those kids come in through your door that day, how are they feeling? You're going to take a temperature of their room. Is this a time where I'm going to have them do an open discussion? Or is this a time where I want them to be doing something online? As a classroom teacher myself, this is something that I did all the time. Like after recess, when the kids came in after recess, I taught second grade, they would come in and I'd be like, okay, how are we going to run this last half? Was it a good recess or was there a problem I might have to deal with? It's like one of those just quick reads that teachers can figure out. The 55, 35, 10 guide is definitely going to help with student engagement because we're going to start to chunk our lessons and we're going to be using technology in a meaningful, purposeful way.
And I think leading into this upcoming year, we're recording this in the early part of August. Schools in many states are starting right about now. Others still have a few weeks or so to go. It's still a case where we don't know exactly what this year is going to hold. I think there's a lot of reason for optimism that we can return to somewhat of a normal learning context, whatever that looks like, or at least schools will have the ability and students and parents will have the ability to determine the learning environments that are most effective and not have circumstances dictate, but there could be some variance over the course of the year. We might see some things that reflect what last year looked like. So when you think about that engagement piece and planning for a variety of different environments. I mean, some schools may still institute hybrid learning, for example, regardless of the pandemic. Are there certain things that you recommend for educators to look for engagement wise that kind of close that gap between learning contexts? Maybe some students are learning online, at least some of the time they're in person. You definitely talked about that blend of utilizing technology effectively, but not overusing it, right? And then having those non-technology times. But yeah, I think like it's often thought of that there was a loss of engagement if students weren't in person, and that's not necessarily the case. There certainly was a different way of delivering that engagement and challenges to it to say we have to learn new things, right? But also there are strategies that work across the board that maybe at this point, especially, educators have learned a lot of new skills that they can now engage in some of these new tactics.
Yeah, so I really encourage teachers for when they're creating their lessons and you want to increase student engagement is to really think about that student ownership piece. Engagement and student ownership go hand in hand. The more power that you can give to those students to take ownership of their learning, the further they're going to go, the more engaged they're going to become. So yes, when we are working with teachers, we really look at how they're delivering their lesson. We're not changing their lesson. We're talking about how they deliver it. When a teacher stands in the front of the room and they talk for 45 minutes, not saying that's good or bad, I'm just saying that what sometimes we lose interest just because the kids are like, okay, 45 minutes with math sitting and listening, 45 minutes in science listening. It just becomes like a really long day for students. So what I talk to my teams of teachers about is like, how do you deliver that content? If you were to take the same content and you put it into chunks or buckets, all right, you're going to put like your whole group conversation and you're going to say, okay, I'm going to do this chunk for about 15 minutes. After I give that big introduction about what it is that we're going to be talking that day, everybody's on the same page. I'm going to hand out a checklist. And I'm going to do that checklist to the students. And on that checklist, it's going to have another small group instruction with the teacher. That's the most important part I tell my teams of teachers to do is like you taught something, but double check to make sure they understand it in a small group. In that small group, we can start to differentiate, which is going to help you really close that knowledge gap, right? Because I'm going to know who needs it, that information, and I'm going to start to drive that instruction. So while I'm in that small group, that teacher's in that small group, I'm going to have the students doing something else that aren't with me. So one group of students might be doing some independent practice where they're going to go in and they're going to practice that skill that we just taught in that whole group lesson. And they're going to either read, they might be doing some vocabulary, they might be doing an activity sheet that goes along with that lesson. And they are going to be sitting in what we call like a pod. And in that pod, the students will be able to ask questions if they get stuck. They don't have to do it all by themselves. It's just a way to, hey, we taught you this. Show me if you understand it. Another group of students are going to be on technology. And in that technology piece, they might be going to like a Khan Academy or an Ed Puzzle or Freckle, where they are going to be relearning that information in a different way. Educators are great. We are enthusiastic. We love to share our knowledge. But sometimes kids learn it through a different modality. So by giving it in a digital format with maybe a little bit of a twist to it, with more visuals, those kids might understand it a little bit more. Most of the websites that I just mentioned also give data. That data is going to be shoved back to the teacher saying, hey, here's what the kids did when you weren't working with them. And then she can use that data to help drive their small group for the next day. The last group of students are going to be doing one of my absolute favorite things. They're going to be showcasing their understanding of the concept that teacher taught during the whole group. They might be building a poster, a traditional poster. They might be doing a Google slide. They might be creating a TikTok video. They might be doing just a time to sit and talk, which I call roll-in chats, which are super fun. They might be building something, creating something, collaborating, communicating, using those critical thinking skills, and even connecting. the content in a purposeful way. It's the 4 C's. So when we design the lesson that the teacher traditionally does as a whole group, and now we break it up into these chunks, kids are automatically starting to be like, whoa, this is different. Oh, class went by in 15 minutes. Whoa, look at everything I got accomplished. That's our starting point. Our starting point is take what they have, put it in chunks. Then eventually we do really like a 2-day checklist where the students go in and they're working at their own pace, place, and path, and they're able just to work at their own speed. I'm telling you, this is mind-blowing. When we get teachers to that level, we don't see any disengagement. We see higher levels of engagement. We see students without their phones in their hands, text messaging. We see less behavior issues. And you know what the biggest thing is? Better test scores. We see that those test scores are starting to increase because the students are now the ones who are taking that ownership. This process that we have been doing has been proven over and over and over again. And I can't wait for more people to jump on board as they look at this knowledge gap and saying, hey, we need to do something. So this one thing that we could do, chunk our lessons. Now we're going to be able to really help those students along the way.
Closing the gap is the most pressing issue in education today. Teachers need to observe their students while they teach to see where engagement drops and confusion sets in. They also need to create small group lessons that directly address knowledge gaps. eGlass is helping teachers close the knowledge gap. It's an illuminated glass writing board with a built-in camera. eGlass enables teachers to write on a board without ever turning their backs to students. It also enables them to record lessons as they teach, giving students learning resources that feel personal and one-to-one. Learn more about eGlass at eglass.io. I love all of that, and you've referenced the knowledge gaps and those strategies for putting them in our view, but then also really addressing and closing them. And it really is the case that whatever name we're using for it in a conversation, knowledge gaps, learning loss, unfinished learning, it's just important that these conversations are solutions oriented so that we can make a difference for students, and we look at the situation we're presented with and we make a plan, because all students and all educators have experienced these challenges over the past couple of years. Disruptions to routine, learning all new processes and tools on the fly, trauma, but everybody's experience is unique and the outcomes are individualized. So when we think about that, and of course personalized learning is a huge part of what we're talking about today. With that in mind, and we think about these learning gaps, we maybe we know what the quote unquote average is, right? And understand data in the big picture, but realistically, each student's successes, gaps, relative progress are all unique and personalized to that student. And a big step in being able to deliver an informed, personalized approach to instruction is how we first assess and understand where those students are. Some of that, of course, is observational, qualitative, the things that teachers do every day to kind of see how students are progressing in the areas in which they're really strong, or the ones in which they need a little extra support. And then also there's data and other things we can collect. What do you think about how we kind of first start that process or do that process effectively of assessing and understanding where those students are so that we can then be personalized in our approach in a really effective way?
I'm glad you realize that it's not just jumping all in and just trying to run with this. It's kind of, you got to gradually build up to it. So believe it or not, we created a deployment plan for everything that I just showcased, and everything you just mentioned is in that deployment plan of like how to start slow, but start and getting that data. So the deployment plan runs something like this. We look at like a time period of like, let's say 4 weeks, and we give like little bits of like, here's your goal, this is what we need to work on. So we start out small by looking at like collecting data from this small group instruction, collecting data from that digital content. We're just collecting. We're not really using it yet because we want the teachers to feel comfortable in this new environment where we're chunking the lessons, where we're doing that small group, and then we're doing some of that independent practice and getting the students familiar with it. So our deployment plan, when we look at it, the first week is doing a traditional classroom for 3 out of the 2 days. The other 2 days, we're looking at doing what we call studios. We have a small group studio and an independent studio. So there's two studios that will be run, and the teacher will be working with half the class while the other class is doing something different. And then halfway through, they will switch. So that what we're building is that stamina for kids to be able to take that ownership level. And then also that teacher to understand that, okay, I can be teaching a small group and they can be working independently. It's okay. We got this. So we built this up for the first couple of weeks where we're just doing two studios collecting that data. Then about week 3, according to our deployment plan that we're rolling out for the last 5 years, we go into week 3 where we're looking at 3 studios. Now we added another one. Instead of working only with half class, now we're breaking the class into thirds. So now in that 3 studios, we're really testing the waters. Can the students do this? Can they work on their own? As we go into week about 5 or 6, we now move into 4 different studios. Those are the studios that I mentioned, that small group instruction, independent practice, digital content where they're working online, and then that collaboration aspect. I call it future ready, but what it is that showcase of knowledge. So about week 5 or 6, the students try out 4 different groups. At that point in time, the teacher's starting to know who's in their classroom, where those knowledge gaps are, how and who needs that extra support. By week 6, now we're using that data to really start to pinpoint our groups. So everything is going to be starting to be differentiating. We still have to follow that pacing guide. We have to follow that scope and sequence. I'm not saying that you don't, but now you're just looking to see, how can I reteach and keep moving forward with this group? How can I enhance the learning for the group that gets it? So eventually in week 6, we're now going to be saying, aha, the data is showing X, Y, and Z. As we move through the deployment plan and going into week 9 and 10, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing this 2-day checklist. And during those 2-day checklists, we're going to extend the amount of time the kids have to work in those different studios so they can create bigger projects, so they can take time to process that information. So we extend the checklist. It's a 2-day checklist. And please go to my website, blendedlearningpd.com, or follow me on YouTube, Kish Marcia, on YouTube, because of the fact that you will see videos of this in action and you'll understand it clearer. But once we move to that 2-day checklist, we're going to start to implement data meetings with the students. So the teacher in week 6 and 5 and 6 and 7 has been using that data to drive the instruction. Well, now in week 9 and 10, we are going to actually go back and say, okay, I want to show you what the data is saying. This is where you are currently learning. How do we get you here? Or, hey, you're doing an amazing job. We're going to push you to that next level. And as soon as we start to show that data to the students and they understand what we're seeing, it's like light bulbs go on. It's a game changer. We hit a home run, because now the kids are going to start working harder and they're going to understand the process and why we're doing what we're doing. So having a deployment plan, knowing that you just don't jump in and go, you slowly, gradually release this control to the students. That's what's going to make all the difference in the world. If you go to my YouTube channel, one of the very first YouTubes you're going to see is talking about this release to the students. And I call it the roller coaster effect. That when something new happens to students, they go through like this roller coaster phase where at first they're in shock, in denial, and they don't understand this new way of teaching. Why can't you just sit here and tell me what I have to learn? So then eventually, when we get to that week 6, 7, and 8, and the kids are at the top of that roller coaster, and they are like, okay, I got this, I understand. They finally grasp this concept of this new way of learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, you've certainly gone pretty deep here into all of these various strategies and best practices that teachers can implement with the personalized learning and blended learning. And a big part of it is finding that right role of technology and using it correctly and effectively. And of course, a lot of those decisions about what we can do with technology are influenced and determined by our tech directors, CTOs, other people in ed tech leadership and technology leadership within our buildings or our districts, who are helping to find those right tools to get and purchase and implement the tools. What are some of the ways, when you think about that, part of it, and making sure that teachers in this case, and other instructional leaders have the right tools to use, and the things that are really going to help students in the best way. How do our technology leaders play a role in supporting these approaches and ensuring that we can bring these instructional practices into action?
Oh my gosh, I get asked this question a lot. Marcia, what should we purchase? What should we get? And my number one thing when I talk to admin and tech leaders is think about what you need. Don't let the technology drive your instruction. Let your instruction drive the technology. So, for example, I'm going to start with software first, and then I'm going to go into actual devices that will help learning. So, when I'm looking at websites and software programs that are going to be useful in the classroom, I talk to the team about what do you want that program to do? What's your outcome you're looking for? So, we're going to look at what we need and then going to find a program to fit. Most people want to just do one program and let that one canned program work for K-12. That is not the solution at all. Do your research and look at what they're really strong with. What is that program? How does it work for that grade band, not for your whole school? So research and then also look at what it looks for, what you're looking for. The last thing is before you purchase a program, ask that company, tell me a school that is using that program. Not only do you pick up the phone and call the tech department, ask them how it's going, but go visit that school using it in action. Because when I suggest a program to anybody, I have seen students using it. I have looked at the data with the teachers behind the scenes. It's not something I'm just like, oh, this sounds good. Oh, it's got great graphics. No, it's the quality of the program. Is it something that will work with your standards? So that's another thing is just say, well, who else is using it? Can I talk to them? Can I go visit it? I want to see it in action because some of these software programs are pretty expensive. Now, when we're talking about hardware and devices, the same goes along with that. Like I'm going to go back to eGlass real quick. At first with the eGlass, when I looked at it, I'm like, this is amazing. I love this, especially for that hybrid and virtual world. I love being able to write and ever be able to see my screen. But it wasn't until I actually used eGlass in a workshop that I'm like, this is golden. And the reason why eGlass works so well is because even in a live audience in front of educators, I never lost that eye contact and I was able to keep that momentum going. Other things that, I use a lot is one device is called Lightspeed. I like Lightspeed sound system because I'm able to listen into the small group settings when I am doing my workshops or when I'm in the classroom with the teacher. Lightspeed has these things called pods, and these pods are like a two-way radio. So I can like listen in. Is that group really doing what they're supposed to while I'm working in my small group? There's a lot of great devices out there, but my point is try it before you buy it. You have to actually physically put it in the environment that you're going to be using before you say, all right, everybody's going to get a smart board. All right, everybody is going to get a document camera. Use it first before you just go spend your money. Again, go to the schools that have those up and running. Do your research because it might look really cool and fancy, but if it doesn't really do what you want it to do in the classroom, then it's just going to become a really fancy paperweight.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is a very, I think, forward-looking conversation. So I really want to end on a forward-looking note here. I'm thinking about the classroom of the future. I'm sure this is something that we could have an entire discussion about for for many hours.
For sure.
But in just the brief time we have here, I'd be really interested in hearing your thoughts on what that classroom of the future would look like. What's the dynamic, and how do the various individuals we've talked about, our technology leaders, our teachers, our school leaders, even students and parents, whomever, how do they work together to build that kind of classroom?
Oh my gosh. I actually started a hybrid high school about 10 years ago. And my hybrid high school was that classroom of the future. This is what the vision is from my viewpoint. What do I actually see a classroom and a building or a campus looking like? So a classroom, if we really think about it in the future, is going to be personalized, meaning that the students are going to have their own individual plan for the day, the week, the month, the year. And it keeps adjusting as they keep growing and building on their different standards. So one of the things that I always talk to my teams about when we're thinking down the line is thinking about like, what if the classroom was set up where kids could have the choice in picking, all right, today this teacher is going to be doing this lesson on this standard. And the kids could pick, oh yeah, I want to go to that classroom because that classroom, I like the way she teaches. She's got a lot of great manipulatives. Or this other teacher does really good lecture and they get me excited because they tell really good stories. So the students would be able to pick where they would want to go for the day. So when they walk into the building, there would be almost like a conference board. Here's your different options. The students look at their data. They look to see where they're missing some concepts, and they get to pick and build their class schedule for the day or the week based off of the different offerings. Now, you might think that this is made up. It sounds really fictitious, but it is not. A lot of schools in South Dakota and in Iowa have already rolled this out. I've been there. I've seen it. It is not make believe. So in a classroom that's not that progressive yet, things that you can do to start moving toward that future view of allowing students to have that ownership and choice and voice in their path of learning would be choice. Creating simple choice boards first. Have those choice boards up. What would you like to do? This or this? Would you like to do this activity or this activity? Would you like to learn online or offline today? When we start to do that, even within our own classroom, we're starting to build that personalized learning environment. It takes time. It takes a lot of dedication to get to that point, but I have seen it. I know it's possible. It's just got to be that big, giant growth mindset to get us there. That future is right down the pipeline, and I cannot wait till we see more of those classrooms in action.
Absolutely. I think that's an exciting future we can all kind of look forward to and work toward. Thank you again, Marcia, for sharing your expertise here on the COSN Podcast. Listeners, make sure to subscribe and rate the COSN Podcast on your favorite platform to help more EdTech leaders find the show, and stay on the lookout for more episodes in this series coming soon. Thank you for listening to this episode of the COSN Podcast, produced in partnership with MindRocket Media Group. Visit mindrocketmediagroup.com to connect with our expert team and learn how we can support your education industry, communications, and marketing goals. And to make sure you never miss an episode of the podcast, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. You can also listen to each new episode on edCircuit.com or COSN.org.